Welcome to everyone who's joining us from various parts of the globe, particularly from the UK and from South Africa. And I welcome you to a South African Chamber of Commerce event. We are based in the UK and I am chairman of the South African Chamber. My name is Sharon Constanson. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. This series that is being run by Adrienne Hall is our Wealth Creator program. And she is spearheading this event. This, I think, is the third one in the series that we are running, where we are talking to leading entrepreneurs in South Africa and those that are supporting other entrepreneurs in South Africa. So Adrienne, if I may, can I hand over to you, please? If you could introduce the guests, and then Makale will do an initial presentation.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining. I'm delighted to welcome Makale Ngwenya, who will be giving us an overview of South Africa's master plans. Makale is deeply involved in the program. She's a senior researcher with DTIC and a member of the Presidential Council for Black Empowerment. She will be talking later to Kelvin Campbell. Kelvin is a writer, an urbanist, and a curator, and the mastermind behind the Massive Small movement. We're going to be looking at wealth creation in South Africa from two different perspectives. The master plan is a top-down perspective, and Kelvin's view about change, successful change, is bottom-up. Makale, may I hand over to you?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, everybody that's joining us from all over the world. It's a real pleasure from my side to be speaking with you this morning. And I don't want to really waste a lot of time, so I'm just going to go into it because I would want to maximize time for discussions a little bit later. From my side, just a correction, Adrienne, I actually work for SACC, the trade union in clothing and textiles. I'm not at the DTIC. So regarding master plans, what are they? So about 2017 or 18, thereabouts, the government introduced this reimagined industrial strategy to boost inclusion and private investment into the South African economy. So the notion, behind the master plans is that they're intended to significantly lift the impact of the state's policy interventions, and also that government doesn't and cannot be able to do everything on its own. So it needs to leverage, from other sectors, including social partners, labor and business, to be able to achieve the best possible, performance for our economy. And as well as the fact that, South Africa has been kind of involved in this social compacting through NEDLAC, what we call tripartism, which is really just a forum for business, labor, and government to sit around the table and speak to one another. So in terms of master plans specifically, they came from the automotive industry, but around the world, they aren't a new thing. But in South Africa, our first interaction with them was through the automotive sector. And obviously that sector before 1994 was, highly protected. And because of trade liberalization, it stood a danger of being wiped out. So the phase two, the period between 95 and 2013 saw another industrial strategy called the Motor Industry Development Plan, which was designed to consolidate and stabilize that sector. And now the period between, the second phase between 2013 and 2018, then we introduced the Automotive Production and Development Program, which focused on expanding the local component sector and ensuring access to the global supply chains. And then phase three of this, we had now the master plans, right, from 2018 to 2035. That's the period where the current master plan is expected to run between. So the primary focus obviously is on transformation and localization through supply development, increasing South Africa's capacity to create these minibuses, taxis, BMWs, including several other cars. VW also has a plant here. And so they are guided by a specific target to, obviously increase investment of about 2.5 billion rands in terms of the fund to support the Black industrialists. And it is expected that local production will be ramped up to 60%. And then obviously massive number of jobs to be created through that, to the tune of about 224,000 jobs created through the sector. Right. So now several plans are being developed. And the objective really is to encourage investment in South Africa, to create a massive number of jobs, and to ensure that, for these jobs that are coming, including, the technological advancements with 4IR, that we increase the career mobility for workers and ensure that people are trained for the, jobs that are going to be emerging as a result of, the technological change. And obviously, again, to transform the economy in terms of increasing Black ownership and including ownership by workers and communities where appropriate, and to obviously create a national, regional, and broader international opportunities, strengthening and deepening regional supply chains and regional development as well. And most importantly, also to reindustrialize the South African economy, particularly, our manufacturing sector. So the key elements of the master plans, what they are essentially, it's just a comprehensive plan of action that encompasses policy, research, and industry deliverables. There are proposals, for collective action by government, industry, and labor, including developing targets for the industry, and to be able to establish, an institutional structure to drive the implementation. So these master plans are used as a tool also to, define coordinated activities that align with a common set of goals for industries as determined by the social partners through the discussions and negotiations. And they're really driven by empirical evidence. So a lot of research is done to inform what needs to be done to identify the tasks, the targets, including, some of the challenges and opportunities, right? And that then forms the overarching vision and the pillars of the master plan. So at the moment, we have several master plans that are in different stages of being developed, in industries or sectors that were identified as underperforming and yet possess significant unrealized opportunities. There are about 13 national departments, so it is really top heavy, and 14 state-owned enterprises, 15 agencies of government, 14 employer associations, including, business, what do I call them? Representatives of business, the business chambers, including industry associations. So master plans naturally aren't designed to be a panacea, so they can't solve everything. They have to prioritize and, look into what can be done within the specified amount of time, and obviously the resource mobilization to ensure that that mandate is reached. So also there is an acknowledgement that, these master plans are an opportunity, for example, to fight illegal imports and counterfeit goods. So there is also, a galvanizing of different agencies of government, SARS, for example, at the ports to ensure that, goods that are coming in are not illegal and counterfeit goods that can harm the local economy. So in terms of corruption, master plans are not the appropriate instrument because they are very focused on these industry targets that are set between the social partners. And these are the master plans that, on the right hand side of the screen, these are the incomplete master plans, and then on the other side, on the left, those are the complete master plans. So we've got obviously that automotive industry master plan, the retail, clothing, textile, footwear, and leather master plan, forestry master plan, the poultry sector, sugar master plan, and very recently, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan was announced. The government is trying to solicit comments from industry stakeholders, communities, and anyone who has an interest, essentially, to have their voice heard in the master plan. And obviously, we've got also the furniture industry master plan. And what's not yet complete is the oceans economy. It's at a very advanced stage. The Ocean Economy Master Plan, the Cannabis Master Plan, which is also at an advanced stage, and very little in terms of the Defense and Aerospace Master Plan has been concluded, including the gas, chemicals, plastics, steel fabrication, and metal, steel and metal fabrication Master Plan. Those haven't started yet. So these present a lot of opportunity, actually. So what is the takeaway, right? So these reimagined industrial strategy focuses on, the key lessons learned from the automotive industry master plan. There are the predefined sectors, meaning not every sector of the economy is going to get a master plan, but those that hold potential to grow the manufacturing base, including industry, and they, are by nature social compacts. The Department of Trade and Industry Competition Minister likes to call them a bring and buy. So everybody brings something to the table in terms of ambitions and what the future of that particular industry will look like. And obviously the commitments at a very high level include, massive number of jobs to be created and channeling investment and, a huge also emphasis on local procurement and localization. And in terms of institutional arrangements, the president is the project management office for all the master plans. And the DTIC is the home, meaning they track and monitor and evaluate the progress that are made. So each master plan, for example, the forestry master plan will be in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and the retail master plan will be at the DTIC. So each master plan that has a home with respect to the national department that is within the scope to implement that master plan. And structures within the master plan involved, working groups that meet regularly, on to report in terms of the progress of the master plan. There's the operational MANCO that ratifies some of the decisions and considers some of the progress that is made through the working groups. And then obviously this executive oversight committee, which sometimes is the industry reference group. This is comprised by deputy ministers, and CEOs of companies, essentially to ensure that all the commitments, targets, and everything are conducted as per the master plan. And then individually, some of the master plans have a project management office that works as an interface between the social partners. And it's really just about problem solving, whatever problems that we come across. Currently, we've got an energy crisis in the country. We also have, some aging infrastructure, and there are limitations also in terms of transport and all of those things. So because we operate in a changing environment, the project management office is there to introduce a little bit of flexibility to say we solve problems as and when they arise and decide on the actions that need to be taken. And there are some offshoots and fruits that have been gained in the master plans. A significant amount of investment that has been channeled to different parts of the country and where the different industries are located. For example, retail, clothing and textiles has predominantly been in the Western Cape, KZN and Gauteng. So we can expect, some kind of distribution spatially in terms of channeling the investment in those areas. And there has been significant, I can say also commitments. BMW has also recently said that, they are committing billions of rands over the next couple of years to, still manufacture the cars at the plant in Pretoria, and Toyota's done similar things. So we've seen kind of a renewed effort and significant amount of communication that is happening between partners who sometimes aren't speaking to each other. But here there is a forum, there is a platform, and the conversation that need to be happening are happening. So I would like to end there in terms of my presentation, and thank you very much for the time which you have provided for me to be able to have this conversation with you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Makale. It's a very positive initiative, and what is so encouraging is embedding the South African approach to policy making by social compact and facilitating the contribution of many voices across all sectors. Kelvin, if I may turn to you. You believe that most top-down initiatives are killed at the outset. So my questions really are: why was that your view? And two, how would or could master plans avoid some of the pitfalls as you see them?
Thank you, Adrienne, and well done, Makale. Peter Senge is probably one of the leading business thinkers, and his observation was that most strategic initiatives driven from the top fail at the outset. And that's an incredibly tough statement to make, because we've all been involved in policy all our lives, trying to make sure that some of these things filter down to the level that they're supposed to filter down to, but they very seldom do. So I'm conscious that top-down alone will not solve the problem, and bottom-up alone will not solve the problem as well. You need this meshing of top-down and bottom-up. So a lot of what we've been talking about in the Massive Small Group is about how do we reconcile the conflicts that exist between top-down and bottom-up, and how do we also release the potentials that exist between top-down and bottom-up. My interest is more around building urban society. It has more a spatial urban perspective that I take, but it's equally applicable to all those other complex things that we deal with in everyday life, which is business. Business is a complex adaptive system that's at work all the time. We tend to drive most of these things in a quite mechanistic, reductionist kind of way to come to some sort of outcome. And I know that the challenges that face South Africa are not just about investment by big business, but how do we really mobilize a massive number of jobs on the ground? So that's where I'd be interested in, how these master plans hit the ground and have an impact on people's lives. I recognize that some businesses are incredibly focused and centralized, like, say, the car industry, but certainly around the clothing industry and others, they can be incredibly localized. So the question is, how does government do this? And it often finds itself in a very difficult position to deal with things on the ground, and makes the rules quite often too complex, the regulations too complex to deliver that change.
Yes, it is true that the master plans follow this paradigm or approach as top heavy plans, which didn't really come from the bottom up, where you have specific and clear aspirations from communities and people who stand to gain and improve their lives on a daily basis. But it's not true that across all the master plans it's always a top-down approach. I'll make an example with the forestry master plan. Some of the forests in the country are located in communities, and some of them are in communal land. So there is a lot of engagement with those communities to ensure that when the state will transfer those the management of those forests, either they go to communities or communities will partner with business to do those things. And obviously the industries are different, where, for example, in the retail and clothing master plan, the retailers have said, look, we want to increase localization to about 60%, meaning we want to be able to grow the value chain and our ability and capability as a country to be able to produce the textiles that we need, and import and export what's required. So sometimes it is possible that the master plans have, a component where communities are a part and they participate in the master plans, and that's certainly true also with the fisheries, the blue economy, economy master plan, where a lot of fishing communities are part of that process. And what I tend to see there, when communities pick up their hand and say we want to participate, sometimes it's long, because you have to, it's a consensus building process, right? And community interests sometimes vary. So it introduces a level of complexity, but it's not impossible. And where it is possible, yes, communities are engaged. But unfortunately, the majority of the time, you see that master plans are that, have that top down and can be, can fall into some of these pitfalls that we are concerned about, because, it would be lovely to just have a from the ground and to the top approach. And yeah, so that would be my response to that. And I hope it suffices.
Thank you. If I can just respond, I'm delighted, and I do recognize that certain sectors are traditionally more top-down than others. And I think your example of the forestation, or the forestry issue is almost a perfect example. The problem with top-down initiatives is they tend to be based on government's old model, which is a command and control model. You kind of command through policy and you control through everyday management of the system that's working. And for me, the challenge is increasingly, how do you move much more to an enabling kind of role in government, where government is much more about cutting red tape, much more about opening up potential, much more about creating what I call condition making, or conditions for these places to flourish, and also moving away from the model of thinking which most governments follow in most parts of the world, which is this highly mechanistic, statistical based kind of approach to doing things, to much more interactive, intuitive, innovative, unpredictable as well, kind of things that happen when you start releasing the potential of people. I'm quite interested in how do you harness the collective power of many small ideas and actions to make a big difference. And through that process, you learn. You start by starting. You learn by doing. And you're also able to learn from your failures, and you can fail small and learn. You can learn from those small failures. Far more successful way of learning is small failures than big failures. So it'd be interesting to see if there are any other parts of any other sectors that could change. The only one that sort of springs to mind was, I think I probably have mentioned it before, is say the automotive industry. I live quite close to Birmingham, which is obviously the focus of the car industry in the UK. And it's increasingly decentralizing its manufacture to an incredibly local level. You might go out and find someone in a shed in the countryside somewhere making brakes or making steering components for using CNC lathes for say Jaguar Land Rover. And you start seeing this idea of the devolution of industry, even if they're big, down to incredibly local levels, incredibly local, and you'd never identify them when you look at, say, the transportation master plan that they have for the UK, that is working like that. But it seems to be working, and innovation increasingly is coming from the small guys working in those sheds. It's not coming from the big businesses running their centralized research and development departments. It's coming from very, very local innovation. And I'd be intrigued to see how we can release that potential in South Africa, because one thing we do know, and I think going back to, say, mid 70s. I think South Africa was in the top 5 most industrialized nations in the world. I don't know where it sits now because it's plummeting so badly, but it's always had that ability to mobilize, and that's that ability to innovate quite quickly. So there's no reason why the potential cannot be realized again. And I know that the threats of places like China that make stuff, better or quicker and get them on the ground quicker, that's what we have to compete against. And Mauritius showed us how well they developed their master plan through. I can remember Mauritius in the 1970s being a pretty derelict kind of place, other than, say, the hotels. And if you go there now, it's incredible the amount of industry that's happened. And it's happened around a combined program that includes education as well. So I'd welcome them, any master plan to respond to that sort of idea. Thanks, Makale.
Yeah, when you're talking, I can hear you holding back on talking about, incrementalism and all the lessons we learned from the built environment that show us actually sometimes it's not the big and fancy things that work. It's slow, incremental actions that, lead to big things and big changes. And I agree with that. And, just to respond in terms of master plans, yes, they are led from a centralized national government point of view, and they will lack those connections to local municipalities as those local actors. Because what I'm trying to say is that it's not often that master plans will interface with the development plans at the local level, right? So, however, when there's a recognition that something needs to be done quickly, for example, cutting red tape, releasing land quickly and fast, giving water use licenses quickly to those that need it, especially in the forestry sector. Some of the red tape is being done, and it's being done from the national level, but obviously has the impact on the ground, right? Sometimes, the beauty of the master plan is the ability to recognize what are the key inhibitors, what are the challenges, and to use the power of national government and to pass some of the laws quite quickly through Parliament, right? The cannabis master plan is one such a place where, because it used to be classified as a drug, a lot of the laws have to change. It takes forever to change laws. So what do we do to short circuit that process to ensure that, the law and policy changes as quickly as, the situation on the ground? Because like it or not, the cannabis industry is booming, not only in South Africa, but globally as well. So it's very difficult to say that the top-down approach here has been, not very successful. There have been some successes, but I do think that there's something to be said about localizing those plans to ensure that, firstly, they change the inequitable spatial geography of South Africa, because we still do have rural areas that are lagging behind in terms of development. So how do master plans respond to those very specific local challenges? And in this sense, it's a mixed bag of fortunes, right? Forestry master plan does speak to communities. We've been to forests that are owned by communities, and those communities are linked to big supply chains from those international or multinational companies in forestry, your SACC, Mondi, and all those guys. So I think some years need to pass by, 5-10 years maybe, for us to be able to look back and say, and reflect on, what has worked and what hasn't worked. It's not that everything hasn't worked perfectly, but certainly there is a lot of value to learn from the ground to say, what are communities looking for? What do businesses around those communities need in order to sustain the existence of those businesses, whether it's improving services around those businesses, and whatever else. It's just to strengthen those linkages, obviously, from communities to businesses and local governments. Definitely, I would agree, certainly, that would be a worthwhile thing to do. However, the way the master plans are designed right now don't have those national industrial policies that interface directly with communities. But we do have some linkages with spatial policies, for example, the SEZs. We have about 15 SEZs, special economic zones that have been developed, right? And there, I think the idea was to break apart that very strong metropolitan pool that we inherited from apartheid, where you have metropolitans that are big and huge migration coming into the cities, coming with its own challenges, driving up the land prices, housing prices, congestion, traffic, and an aging infrastructure, right? So SEZs by nature is supposed to, I think, pull back from that and ensure that the jobs are going to where people are. And there's some good success stories there and there aren't. And I think the idea was to make the space more equitable and more just. And to counter some of the negative effects that we're beginning to see. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now. I mean, there's obviously so much that can be said from an urban and planning perspective into how do we draw those strong linkages to ensure that the spatial geography of South Africa has changed and that we can compete with the likes of China and those other countries.
Look, I mean, there are real success stories, and I think we need to celebrate those successes when we can. I think, say, the film industry in the Western Cape, for one, is a massive success story. I was involved recently in some research work around the film industry, and it's phenomenal the number of jobs it creates. 70,000 jobs created from one Cape Town film studios. Because most filming is remote. It's most a lot of it's filmed outside of studios. So there's an incredible prospect for that, and that's become incredibly localized as well, which is fantastic. Because once again, you'll find the ability of a couple of people working in a shed somewhere, producing, let's say, animations or something like that for the film industry. And that's incredibly good job creation. There's other instances in, say, the building sector. I was surprised to find out in the recent work I did that for every one RDP house that's built, 200 shacks are built every day. So if you look at the scale of, say, the shack building industry, it's absolutely massive, but it's never taken into consideration because it's informal. So the question I'd be asking is, how do you scale up the shack building industry to solve the housing problem? Because we're not solving it from the top down. The top downs are just not working at all. I'm minded when you mentioned incrementalism. I've always thought that some people would say we need radical change, and that radical change is incredibly difficult to achieve, and it's either hit and miss generally. An incremental change people see as too slow. So we coined the term radical incrementalism. Is how do you radically scale up many small things to make that big difference? And that's how societies have evolved. And that's where, it's the best way of creating growth in some ways. So, I'm certainly encouraged. I certainly believe that governments need to have a top-down view and they need to be leading. But they're the ones who are setting out the sort of the vision. They possibly setting out the roadmap as well to achieve that. But in some way, they also have to be responsive from the needs of people from the bottom up. I also like some of the work that's been done around urban acupuncture, which you might have heard about as well, which is small interventions where you make small injections into places and see if you can start stimulating economies or local interest or local development in whatever form. So as long as government recognizes that writing a plan and publishing it and giving it a good name and making sure the graphics are all right. As long as it doesn't stop there, it's really got to hit the ground quite hard. And I think South Africa has laboured under very complex top-down policies, particularly in my world, which is urbanism, for a long, long time. I mean, you probably know from your experience as well, Makale, it's how difficult, how long these things take to do. And, while we're busy doing all those long things, people are squatting on a daily basis, so The question is, how do you recognize that energy and mobilize that energy and take it forward? And I think that could be a big win for South Africa. Okay.
Kelvin, may I ask, how would you change the operating system to bring master plans and this huge energy and creativity around the informal sector that you've highlighted? What would your views be on that?
Okay, well, I've been looking at it from an urban perspective, but it's certainly, as I said, equally applicable to, say, an economy, whatever the economy is the first thing that we've been guilty of is making complex rules and regulations. Now, DTIC, who is the founder of Visa, had a wonderful quote, which he said, simple purpose and clear principles create intelligent behavior, intelligent and complex behavior. Complex rules and regulations create stupid behavior. So in our world, I'm talking about in the urban development world, we've been creating stupid behavior for a long time. And we need to sort of move towards certainly complex rules and regulations to much more simple rules. I've often said that those rules have to be so easily understood. They sort of linger, what we tend to do is we tend to sort of write policies and they linger in big words and legal jargon. And the person on the ground just doesn't understand them, can't engage in these things. And I'm talking about on the ground as being even up to sort of SME scale, which is difficult. So how do you move from complex rules and regulations to simple rules? And then the second thing is, how do you move from a master plan approach that always predicts an end state? There was by this we'll be, we'll have reached this sort of particular point. We would have developed, 50,000 houses, or we would have whatever it is, to much more focusing on the starter conditions. Where does government put its 20% of its money? And I'm saying increasingly focus on how you start things. And then through that process, you start learning things, because people start by starting, they learn by doing, and then you start to create that sort of feedback loop of change. Then the final one for me, which is absolutely crucial, is to move away from a command and control model, which is so outdated. I can't think of business using the kind of approaches that governments use in the work they do. This idea of setting out 10-year master plans and then only reviewing them after the 10th year, so that you move towards a much more of an enabling type of approach. And I've always believed that if we're going to change quickly, we need to move that kind of situation where I think Marcus Aurelius's famous quote was, "The past is spent and gone, the future is uncertain. Let's manage in the present." So this idea of managing in the present all the time, so that you're constantly getting feedback, you're constantly reviewing what you're doing. You don't move towards these kind of labored, let's review it in 5 years' time sort of thing. You're actually almost instantaneously getting feedback. And that's what technology has given us, is the ability to get rapid and continuous feedback. So I'd start from that position. How do you turn those master plans into simple rules that people understand?
Makale, would there be mechanisms in the current master plan process to accommodate some of the things that Kelvin has spoken about, and to give that some kind of oxygen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of room, and some of it is already happening and has been accommodated in the process. Even though, from a glance, it would look and it would seem like the approach is, very top-down, command and control kind of, from a command and control perspective. We're seeing something shifting sometimes, and a stimulation of actions. And I can only point towards, examples. For example, in the retail, clothing, textile, footwear, and leather master plan, by virtue of the retailers saying they want to increase local production to 60%, meaning they don't want to have a lot of imports coming in. What that has happened is, it has reactivated this massive demand now for jobs, and those that previously couldn't come into the market are now informal, right? And sometimes are working their way. They're working their way from being informal to being formal, right? And some of the success has also caused a growth in the informal economy. And I say informal not because these are just activities that are unregulated or not. There are some systems in there that are institutionalized and they have a logic, they seem to work, but we're unable to count those actions to be reflected into the GDP and output of the country, right? So these master plans, some of them have very short time spans because they're meant to catalyze the industry as quickly as possible to be able to look at the 2030 vision as prescribed by the National Development Plan, right? So the master plan departs from that very long timelines that we only look back after 30 years in terms of what has been achieved. But for example, the forestry master plan is supposed to be implemented within 5 years. 5 years of looking at prioritizing what needs to happen, what needs to be done, how very quickly, as opposed to taking a long time. So we see a lot of changes in response in terms of policy where there used to be blockages. The turnaround times are faster. A lot of the red tape is cut, and for that, investment is going into those places and areas or sectors where it's becoming easy to make it, those decisions. And I want to come back again to this housing versus shack building. The housing approach that we have in the country is totally inappropriate. There's so many levels. I wrote my master's thesis on, the informal buildings, in Johannesburg, in the inner city, that have been abandoned, right? But yet people are living in those conditions. So how do we catalyze those actions to ensure that our housing programs, particularly those that are subsidized by government, are responsive to what people need, right? And shacks and shack building, solve some of these problems. Shacks are often located on what we say is well-located land that would ordinarily be very much expensive, and RDP housing won't be built there because this land is expensive, and yet you see shacks, that are there. So that's well-located land because people know where they want to live and they know where they want to work, and those decisions make economic sense for them. But if you look at the housing code, that's the Bible for all the subsidy housing. It's totally inappropriate, and it's producing more and more problems within a very, financially constrained environment where we are seeing the budgets being cut every year. So why are we still building bricks and mortar in contributing to urban sprawl? Why aren't we building maybe smaller, densified places of living for those that can't afford? So I think that paradigm is shifting, but I would seriously question the ability of the master plans to to be a panacea. It certainly can't solve all the problems, but they are identified priority actions that are agreed upon through a consensus building process, and those that are required. And this is regular work that's been updated. I think shortly the DTIC is going to produce what we call a dashboard. So visually people will be able to see where the master plans are, how much money, billions of rands have gone, and how many jobs have created. Not just jobs, right? Labor says they want decent jobs. And business wants to be able to have these conditions where investment can go in. So we will have a visual representation soon. I think that project will also be spearheaded by the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation. So it won't take a long time for us to say whether master plans successful, whether not, where the evidence will be placed in a public platform and these dashboards. So unfortunately, we are in a situation where we can learn from industries such as the urban and planning and housing space, but potentially the way we do things is very rigid. and doesn't accommodate us taking in those lessons to implement them where they're needed. And there's something to be said about maybe creating spaces for that to happen. But as it is, it's happening, but not so much. Thank you.
Okay. Right.
Makale, just a quick question. If the master plan program, is one of its objectives about rebuilding trust in investment in South Africa? Because that has been severely dented. And this seems to me to be an initiative which may very well lay a foundation to rebuild that trust.
I really love that you've asked that question because as social partners, we don't often agree in terms of what must happen, right? And so through this process of master plans, we are forced into a space. Labor has its demands, business has its demands. And often these are people on the table whose motivations, aren't the same. Then there's a lack of trust. But what has happened is now, because we have to speak and we have to produce this document and we have to agree, right? It has made, that trust relationship, those relationships better. Certainly. I mean, some of the negotiations we entered into were so acrimonious. But now, one of the guys was saying, I may be your enemy, but you will know and you will see me when I'm coming to stab you in the front instead of the back, right? So we won't have a situation where 100% of the time we agree. However, there's a renewed sense of trust because we are talking, it takes a long time to produce a master plan, 18 months. So, government, there's a lack of trust for, civil society has given up on government, saying, we've been asking for things and we know what we haven't gotten. Labor, business, but this process, I think, for me, one of the takeaways and one of the, positive things is the fact that conversations that need to be occurring are happening, and there are actually greater levels of trust. And you can see that actually where business puts its money where, its mouth is.
Thank you, Makale. Thank you so much, Makale and Kelvin. I'm going to hand back to Sharon now to take questions from the floor. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. And some of the points that I found really insightful and amusing, I thought the one that you mentioned, Makale, was the one where you talked about squatters finding well-located land. That did amuse me no end. And when I actually look at the places that I see the squatter camps appearing, I absolutely get that, but I would never have been able to put that clarity to it. And Kelvin, to your point around clarity of and simplicity of vision so that we can allow creative thinking, because I would translate that quote you used to more about the creativity rather than the complexity that we can create out of clarity. And what I'm hearing here is we can't operate where government doesn't give direction, even if government doesn't have the capacity, capability, leadership ability, business knowledge and experience to be able to engage further in the way we would obviously like. We know we're not going to get that. And to your point, Makale, civil society gets frustrated. But if we didn't have the vision, we'd be in a worse place than where we are having it. And Kelvin, you talked again also about the acupuncture, the sort of energizing small niche areas of quality activity that energize that economy. And Makale, you were talking about that. When does that feed into GDP? The question out of all of that summary and interesting points that you brought about is, in the informal economy, through working from the bottom up activities, at what point do we start to see this creative energy happening by actually getting stuff done, being good, agile South Africans that we can be, being resilient and saying, I can't wait any longer, I need to do something. When does that actually start to filter into the numbers of the economy, into the recognition by government that you don't have to command and control everything, because all you do is kill it? We can let things grow. Maybe Makale and then Kelvin, maybe give some feedback. And then I've got quite a few other questions we've got after that. See if we can get them in.
Thanks for those reflections. Really, really intriguing. I do think, there is a recognition from government that there are certain things that the private sector can do very well. And this has been a process a lot of times where private sector says, yes, we can do some of these things well. We acknowledge that, and we will do it well. But we need government to, make the environment conducive. So a lot of that has been happening. I do think that the master plans aren't very, very complicated, right? I work for a trade union where we often have to relay back to our members, what are we doing in the master plans? And in the simplest language, do we have decent work? Are the labor laws and the policy framework, basic conditions of employment act, safety, everything, national minimum wage were applicable? Are those things there, right? And sometimes we depart from a point where some sectors don't have that. But with the master plans, we're able to say, okay, we're not going to build Rome in a day, but what is the priority? Safety, health, maybe, let's have the national minimum wage, which is currently at 24 rands, being paid, and everything is phased in, right, to give companies and those adjustments that need to happen. And there'll always be a time lag between when something is implemented and we're able to see the impact of that. But I'm encouraged by some of the things that we're able to see. For us in the textile and clothing sector, some of the activities, for example, like a very coordinated actions by SARS looking at imports, illegal and counterfeit goods, which sometimes are driven by organized crime, right? So there's been a very real, and you can see it every day. We get reports from the media to say, government has looked into those things. They've confiscated goods, they've been burned, and all of those things. And we're also seeing a renewed interest in looking at how do we use recyclable things like bottles, water bottles, to create new materials, right? So there is so much that is happening on a daily basis that on my side, my hope is renewed. And the fact that, yes, the government is showing leadership in terms of what it can do, and business is saying, we trust the government in its intentions. Maybe not 100%, but labor is also saying, yes, we won't have a lot of strikes the season, and when you negotiate for wages. So let's give each other some space and let's work around some of these constraints. But definitely there is a lot that is being done, and gives me hope that we not only are we ready, we are doing work on the ground on a daily basis.
Thank you, Makale. Kelvin, you'd like to give some input on that one?
Yeah, just a quick response to it. I think firstly, recognizing that the informal 85% of the world is the informal sector now. If we look at the UN figures on it, so it's and that's where all the jobs that are being created in that sector. So we have to recognize and embrace it. The big problem with the informal sector is it finds itself difficult to transition from informality to formality, and that's actually where government can play a major role. What tends to happen is that officialdom tends to kill the informal sector, or alternatively, it stays in the informal sector because it can't play by the rules to get into it. So I think that's where we have to change. The recognition is that most people are getting on with things despite government rather than because of government in most parts of the world. This is not a unique South African thing. So, for me, making sure that we don't set the rung of the economic ladder too high for people to be able to make that transition. And to me, that's where entrepreneurship starts. It starts at someone seeing an opportunity, and it's a small beginning. And how do we turn that small beginning into something that does start contributing to the wider economy? So I think governments increasingly have to just shift their view on what informality means. As far as I'm concerned, if someone's creating a job, that's what we should be looking, whether it's formal or informal. The fact that they don't pay tax, or the fact it's difficult to get taxes out of that group is another matter. So I think that's where the challenge lies in governments in most parts of the world.
It is unbelievably challenging to get that balance. And the problem you potentially have is that a lot of the master plans, however much I'm sure there are roundtables and discussions, the people who actually write it don't actually do the day jobs of the industry environment, the delivery mechanism that's going to actually happen on the ground. So there's immediately a translation from a very structured brain in policy to a very creative brain in delivery. And that in itself is a translation risk and a challenge. But just asking a couple of the questions that are coming from the floor. One of them is around, and it's funny enough, correlates one of the slides that you brought up that made me think along those lines. You talk about all the master plans and the different government departments into which they are led. And knowing how, in my corporate governance job, how often companies can silo activities in the downward direction and very little goes horizontal. And the question is, to what extent is that happening in a siloed environment within the government? And is there an area beyond the capabilities and brain of Makale Ngwenya that we can look across some of these activities and learn across those activities, or have some kind of oversight translation back of any of the value that is gained in the others? Thanks.
Yeah, I really like that question, and thank you. So in the master plan, sometimes there are cross-cutting interventions that require departments to speak to one another and do away with the all siloed approach of doing things. But the scope is very limited between coordinating work and actually having the implementers, officials come into these meetings. There are some weaknesses where that is concerned. And my hope is that we'll have like stronger project management officers that will ensure that the right people are coming into the space to have the right conversation, to be able to do the correct activities as outlined. So there is that. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, I really do wish that I could just say, okay, let's have one super government, because we all need to be sitting around the same table. Because some of the delays in having these action plans implemented is the fact that the relationship between governments isn't so great insofar as they're able to speak to one another. They each have their own implementation plans. Sometimes those implementation plans don't speak to the aspirations contained into the master plan. So there's some coordination that needs to be done, but at least there is some recognition. And where possible, industries through their CEOs, ministers and deputy ministers, and leaders of the trade unions, they are talking at that level to say, we're seeing this as a risk, and steps are being made to remedy that. But obviously, there's still some learning and progress that needs to be done.
As we have with all leadership in all organizations and anywhere, it's down to the individual. So we come very much down to the capability of the humans within the groups, the policy, the delivery, the companies, the industries. We are over time. I do apologize. There is a question around requesting some statistical information. So Adrienne, if I could ask you maybe to get something from Makale that gives us some indication on the success of job creation relative to the master plan expectation. And we will share that with the slides and the video of this movie. Livy, listen to me. You get me into the film industry, Kelvin, you get me completely confused as to where I am today, and I'm definitely not on set. Thank you to both of you. Kelvin, final comment from you that you would like to make, and then we will need to close.
I just wish South Africa everything of the best in its future endeavors. It's got such potential. You know, I visit regularly. My heart is still there. I've got African sun in my blood, so I can't get it out of it. I live in a well, look at outside, pretty overcast place for midsummer at the moment. So you know, I'd say just try new things, you know, and don't listen to what the rest of the world is saying. You know, make your own difference. That would be my challenge.
That very wise words on which to end. Thank you everyone for staying late, and people have stayed right to the end, and I do appreciate that. Thank you very much to both of you, Makale and Kelvin. You gave me many thoughts to consider and to share and to summarize. And Adrienne, thank you very much. Very, very wonderful to have you leading the questions and some of those really insightful questions you did ask of the team. And thank you for your capability of giving some clear answers and honest answers that we can trust. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.